She heard every word they said about her, while her brain was bleeding. Joan Whitaker, retired science teacher and widow, wasn't confused. She was conscious. Her son called it attention-seeking. Her doctor called it anxiety. By the time they realized she was dying, she'd already decided how to live. Now, the hospital that silenced her answers to the patient who heard everything. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The morning light slanted through Joan Whitaker's kitchen window, turning the stainless steel sink into a blinding mirror. She was rinsing a mug when her hand trembled. A flicker at first, like a skipped note in a familiar song. She blinked hard. The tremor spread up her arm. Then the floor tilted. Her knees gave out before she could catch the counter. The mug shattered beside her. Air thickened, every sound slowing down. The hiss of the kettle, the dull thump of her body hitting tile. A low groan that might have been her own voice. She tried to move, to push herself up. Nothing answered. Her brain screamed, "Get up, Joan, move your hand." But the signal dissolved somewhere between thought and muscle. The room stretched and warped, the ceiling light pulsing like a heartbeat. Then sirens, then strangers. The paramedics' voices came from far away, words melting into static. "BP is dropping. Possible stroke. Let's move." Someone's gloved fingers pressed at her neck. A flashlight beam cut across her eyes. She wanted to tell them she was awake. Not okay, but awake. That she could hear everything. But her mouth refused to shape the words. The world blinked. And when it blinked back, she was under harsh white lights, hospital ceiling tiles, monitors, a beeping rhythm steady and strange, like a metronome keeping time for someone else's life. A familiar voice, clipped and impatient. "She's fine. She just wants attention." Evan. Her son's tone sliced through the fog, colder than the IV in her arm. She tried to turn her head, but the effort sent a lightning bolt of pain through her skull. She could only stare at the edge of the fluorescent light and listen. A second voice, a woman's, replied, cautious but detached. "We'll keep monitoring her, Mr. Whitaker. I'll note your concerns." "Dr. Porter," she assumed. The name tag had flashed in her periphery earlier, a doctor too busy to look past the chart. Joan's heart hammered once, hard. Attention? The word burned like acid. She had given attention her entire life, to students, to her son, to every detail of everyone else's world. Now, the one time she needed someone's, she was dismissed as a performance. Footsteps clicked away. The room quieted. Only the beeping remained. Another sound entered. Softer. The nurse. Younger voice. "Mrs. Whitaker? Can you hear me?" Joan wanted to scream yes. "I think she's aware," the nurse said, lowering her tone. "Her pupils are reactive. Vitals are uneven, though." Dr. Porter's voice floated back in. "Noted. Could be anxiety. We'll see how she responds to fluids." The nurse hesitated. "Should we run a CT? Just in case?" "Not yet." Dismissive. Paper rustled. "We'll observe for a few hours." A few hours. Joan wanted to laugh, if her throat would allow it. She had spent a career teaching the difference between observation and action. They were about to learn that lesson firsthand. Something shifted near her hand. A touch. Featherlight. The nurse again. "You hang in there, okay?" she whispered. "I'm Casey." Casey. The name slipped into Joan's fog like a small glowing ember. She focused on it, held it steady. The voices faded again, replaced by the mechanical sigh of machines and the hum of fluorescent light. Every sound became an anchor. The shuffle of feet outside, the faint buzz of a phone vibrating somewhere, the distant call over the intercom. Her world had narrowed to hearing and knowing. No speaking. No movement. only listening. Later, she didn't know how much later, she caught another fragment. Visitor for Joan Whitaker. Authorized family only, said Evan's voice. She doesn't need anyone upsetting her. Marlene. It had to be Marlene. She would have driven straight from Bloomington the second she heard. Joan wanted to weep. Not for herself, but for the years she'd spent defending Evan's edges, softening his arrogance with patience. The nurse protested softly outside. She's her medical contact. Not anymore, Evan snapped. I'm handling everything. A door clicked shut. Silence again. Joan's chest ached with helpless fury. Inside her skull, she screamed words that never reached her tongue. You don't get to handle me. The monitor beeped faster. Casey appeared again, her face half shadowed by the monitor's glow. It's okay, she whispered. I'm still here. Joan's hand twitched. Just once. But Casey saw it. Her breath caught, and for a heartbeat she smiled. Quick, determined, knowing she'd witnessed something important. Then footsteps sounded from the hall. Evan's voice, low and impatient. You're wasting your time, nurse. Casey straightened, professional mask snapping into place. Just doing my job, sir. Then do it quietly. He left again, the scent of his cologne lingering like insult. Joan listened to it fade, the footsteps, the hum, the world itself folding inward, and made herself a single promise. If I live through this, I will never let them speak for me again. The heart monitor's beeps quickened, slicing the air with new urgency. The first thing Joan became aware of was the sound. Not the beeping, but the murmur of decisions being made without her. Voices near her bed folded into one another, words blurred by fatigue and drugs she hadn't agreed to. Somewhere above her, the ceiling light hummed. Each pulse of it felt like a countdown she couldn't stop. No real change, a voice said, flat, clinical. Another, quieter. Her pressure's stable, but she's not following commands. She wanted to tell them she could hear everything, that she understood every syllable, but her tongue felt like stone, her throat sandpaper. Beneath the weight of her own body, anger pooled, hot and alive. I am not gone. Evan's shoes clicked on the floor. Even without opening her eyes, she could map his stance. Shoulders squared, chin raised, like a man in charge of something he didn't actually understand. So, he said, his tone bright in the way that tried too hard. You'll keep her comfortable. That's all she needs. Comfort measures, yes, Dr. Porter replied. We'll note limited intervention per family request. There was a faint squeak of a pen against paper. The kind of sound that could decide a person's future. Joan's heart stuttered once. Limited intervention. That meant they weren't planning to fight for her. She wanted to scream. The muscles in her jaw twitched, a futile protest. Outside the curtain, another voice. Familiar. Furious. Marlene. She was fine 2 days ago, she shouted. You think she suddenly lost her mind? Ma'am, please. A staff member tried, voice lowering. Families requested privacy. I am family, Marlene snapped, and I know Joan Whitaker doesn't collapse for attention. You're missing something. Joan could almost see her, hair unbrushed from the drive, coat half-zipped, that determined look that had gotten her through every crisis since nursing school. But the argument ended the way bureaucracy always does, with silence thick enough to choke on. Footsteps retreated. The door clicked. And Joan was alone again. Except for the steady hum of machines that pretended to care. Dr. Porter's voice returned, dictating softly into her tablet. Psychosomatic presentation, no intervention required at this time. Each word landed like a nail being driven in. Psychosomatic. A polite way of saying hysterical. No intervention. A clean way of saying don't bother. Joan's eyes burned behind closed lids. It wasn't fear anymore. It was humiliation, sharp and electric. Years of teaching her students to trust logic, to trust evidence, and now she was being written off as emotional noise. Something cool brushed her wrist. The IV line shifted. A faint scent of antiseptic cut through the stale air. Casey. Her movements were gentle but deliberate. A careful adjustment here, a small squeeze of the bag there. Joan could tell she was working slower than protocol allowed, like she wanted to be sure she was seen, but not too seen. Casey leaned in close. "If you can hear me, Mrs. Whitaker, I just want you to know, I don't think you're faking it." Her whisper was almost lost under the monitor's hum. "They should have scanned you the minute you got here." A pause. "I'm sorry they didn't listen." Joan tried to move her fingers. Just one. Just enough to tell her she wasn't alone in this sea of noise. For a long moment, nothing. Then, a faint tremor. Barely there. Casey froze. Her eyes darted down, then widened. "There you are," she breathed. Joan wanted to cry from relief, but even her tears refused to obey. "I'll note this," Casey whispered, pretending to adjust the IV. "But I can't promise they'll read it." Her words broke something open inside Joan. Not despair, not hope, but a fierce, clean rage. The kind that builds, not burns. The kind that waits. Footsteps echoed in the hall. Casey's head jerked up. Dr. Porter's voice, crisp. "Nurse Lynn, any changes?" Casey hesitated just a beat too long. "No major changes, doctor. Vital steady." "Good, let's keep it that way." The curtain rustled. The doctor left. Casey exhaled slowly and looked down at Joan again. "Hang in there," she said softly. "Some of us still see you." She tucked the blanket higher, a small human gesture in a place that had forgotten how to offer them. As Casey stepped out, the room dimmed again. The rhythmic beeping felt like an argument she refused to lose. Inside her mind, Joan whispered the only words she could still control. "They can write what they want. I'll write my own record when I wake up." The monitor spiked once, sharp and loud as if answering back. The morning in Joan's hospital room arrived in the color of neglect. Pale gray light filtered through blinds that hadn't been opened since she was admitted. The monitors still pulsed steady, but beneath their steady rhythm lived a wrongness no one seemed to notice. Casey Lynn noticed. She stood by the charting computer, eyes scanning the screen for the 5th time. The labs didn't make sense. Sodium low, clotting factors off, blood pressure numbers inconsistent with the narrative everyone else had agreed on. Psychosomatic, didn't match physiology this messy. She hesitated, glancing toward the hallway where Dr. Porter's voice drifted from the nurse's station. The doctor was mid-conversation, bright and breezy as she recited rounds to another attending. Casey felt her jaw tighten. She printed the report and stepped out. "Dr. Porter, can I run something by you?" The physician turned, her expression patient but practiced, the kind reserved for overzealous nurses. "What's up, Casey?" "I rechecked Mrs. Whitaker's labs, her hematocrits climbing and sodium's dropping. That could point to—" Dr. Porter's tablet chimed, interrupting. She swiped, scanned, and smiled thinly. "Casey, she's been stable all night. Mild dehydration can explain most of that. Let's keep fluids steady." "But the neurological signs?" "She's unresponsive but reactive. Anxiety can present that way in older adults. We'll reassess later." Casey's mouth opened, then shut. She watched the doctor stride away, coat swinging, a blur of confidence and denial. Back in the room, Joan lay motionless. But inside her skull, the world burned. She could sense when Casey returned. The nurse's steps were lighter than the others, deliberate, hopeful in their own quiet way. "Morning, Mrs. Whitaker," Casey murmured. "I saw those labs. You'd roll your eyes if you could see what they're calling normal." Joan wanted to smile, wanted to tell her she was still herself, Still the woman who corrected lab reports for fun when her students made math errors. But all she could manage was the slow, angry beat of her pulse. The door burst open without warning. "Marlene Ruiz for Joan Whitaker," came a voice, calm but sharp enough to cut. The charge nurse tried to stop her, but Marlene was already halfway to the bed. Her winter coat was still damp from sleet, her hair pinned back like armor. "Joan," her voice cracked. "Honey, if you can hear me, you hold on, you hear?" Evan appeared seconds later, exasperation radiating off him like heat. "She doesn't need a crowd right now," he snapped. "Mom needs quiet." "What she needs," Marlene said, stepping closer to the bed, "is a doctor who doesn't treat her like a bored teenager. You think she's pretending? This woman raised honor students. She worked 30 years shaping minds sharper than yours." Evan's expression flinched, a tiny fracture in his composure, before he recovered. "You're overstepping." Marlene turned to the nurse's station window, voice rising. "Hey, is anyone going to run a proper test, or do we just watch her fade?" Dr. Porter appeared again, her tone clipped, public. "Ms. Ruiz, I need you to calm down. We have orders in place." "What orders? To do nothing?" "Please step outside," Porter said, hand already gesturing toward security. Casey stepped between them, voice steady but low. "Dr. Porter, could we at least get neurology eyes on her? Just to rule out an acute bleed. Her labs." Porter sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Fine. If it makes you feel better, I'll request a note from neurology. They're backed up 3 days." Casey swallowed her frustration. "Understood." Marlene's glare followed the doctor until she disappeared down the hall. Then she looked at Joan, her anger crumbling into heartbreak. "Don't let them write you off, Joni," she whispered. "You don't quit. You never have." She pressed her palm against Joan's, warm, trembling. Joan felt it, somewhere beneath the paralysis, like an ember pressed to skin. The room quieted after Marlene left, but the storm didn't. Casey typed quickly at the charting station, her expression taut with purpose. She wasn't waiting 3 days. Through a secure channel, she drafted a consult, discreetly marked "urgent review requested." She didn't attach her full signature, just her initials. If anyone asked later, she could claim it was a system error. Hours passed. The blinds threw gray stripes across Joan's sheets. She could feel fatigue pulling at her consciousness again, the sedation fog dragging her down. She tried to fight it, tried to stay awake long enough to sense if someone new had entered the room. Then she heard it. A man's voice in the hallway, low but seething. "Evan. You went behind my back?" His tone was venom wrapped in politeness. "Who authorized that consult?" Casey's answer was calm, measured. "I did what I thought was medically necessary." "Medically necessary?" Evan's voice rose. "You're a nurse, not God. If my mother doesn't want all these procedures—" "Your mother hasn't said anything," Casey said quietly. There was the sound of something being slammed. Maybe a clipboard, maybe a door. Joan's heart raced. Monitors responding in kind. Security voices murmured. Dr. Porter's heels clicked closer. "Mr. Whitaker, please, let's step away." Joan couldn't see the chaos unfolding, but she could feel it. Every vibration of sound, every flicker of tension. Somewhere in that storm, her anger transformed into clarity. They had decided she was helpless. They had decided wrong. The order came through before dawn. A single electronic ping broke the sterile quiet of Joan's room. CT scheduled. Stat. Casey exhaled in relief she didn't dare show. She'd written and rewritten the request 6 times in her mind, knowing the moment it cleared, the floodgates would open. 2 transport techs arrived within minutes, their efficiency all business. The one on the left called her name, as if she could answer. "Mrs. Whitaker, we're going to take you for a quick scan, okay?" The sheet rustled as they slid her to the gurney. Joan could feel the motion, the cool air of the hallway licking her skin as they moved. Machines beeped faint goodbyes as she passed. Dr. Porter met them near the imaging suite. Her tone was bright, brittle. "This wasn't approved through me," she muttered to Casey, low enough not to carry. Casey's reply was even quieter. "Then you can take the credit when it saves her life." Porter's jaw tightened. She said nothing. The CT machine waited, humming in its mechanical patience. The scan was fast. Contrast, slices, sequence. Joan lay still as light passed through her, silent witness to her own unraveling. When the images appeared on the screen, the silence turned solid. A thin crescent of white shimmered near the midline of her brain. Small, yes, but sharp and dangerous. Dr. Porter stared. "That can't be right." Her voice faltered. She zoomed in again, toggling between frames. Repeat sequence. The radiologist, a man with tired eyes and coffee breath, just shook his head. "It's right. Acute subdural. Small, but active." Casey crossed her arms. "So not psychosomatic, then." Porter didn't look at her. "Page neurosurgery. Now." The words came out strangled, half command, half confession. By the time they wheeled Joan back to her room, the place had changed. Monitors hummed louder. People moved faster. The air itself seemed to thicken with the sudden weight of accountability. Evan arrived minutes later, still in his designer jacket, phone in hand. "What's going on? Why all this drama?" Dr. Porter straightened, composing herself before turning to him. "We found evidence of a small brain bleed. It's manageable, but we need to act quickly." Evan blinked, expression caught between disbelief and irritation. "No, that can't be right. You said she was stable." "She was," Porter said softly. "Now she's not." He rubbed his forehead, looking around like someone searching for an exit. "We agreed on no big interventions. She wouldn't want—" "Stop." Marlene's voice sliced through the room. She'd been waiting in the hall, fury barely contained. "Don't you dare speak for her again." Evan spun. "You don't even belong here." "I belong wherever she's being mistreated," Marlene shot back. "And unless you want this hospital on every news station by morning, you'll let the doctors fix what they ignored." Dr. Porter turned toward her, eyes wide. "Please, Ms. Ruiz." "No," Marlene said, pointing at the chart in Porter's hand. "You signed that psychosomatic note, didn't you? You almost let her die because a man told you she was dramatic." Casey flinched but didn't intervene. There was truth in every word. The tension snapped when the neurosurgery resident burst in. Young, hurried, but fully awake. "CT confirmed acute subdural. We've booked OR4. Prep immediately." Joan could feel hands moving around her, unhooking lines, securing new ones, cold alcohol swabs against skin, the tug of tape, voices overlapping, the symphony of emergency. Marlene leaned close, whispering fiercely into Joan's ear. "You hear that, Joni? They're moving now. You just hang on. You're going to make them regret every minute they wasted." For the first time in days, Joan felt something almost like calm. The fury that had carried her this far condensed into purpose. Hard, bright, and clear. Evan hovered near the foot of the bed, pale, his composure fraying. "You can't just—" Dr. Porter cut him off, voice stripped of all pretense. "We can, and we are. Step aside, Mr. Whitaker." He froze as they wheeled Joan past. The hallway lights blurred overhead, white, then shadow, then white again. The gurney rattled like a distant train heading toward the edge of something irreversible. Casey jogged alongside, checking lines, whispering more to herself than anyone else. "Come on, Mrs. Whitaker. You've got too much to say to leave now." As the OR doors swung open, Joan caught a final sound, Marlene's voice, steady as steel. "If anything happens to her, I'll own this place before sunrise." The last thing Joan saw was the glare of surgical lights flooding her vision, pure and blinding. Then, Mercifully, nothing. The world returned in fragments. The rhythmic hiss of oxygen, the low hum of machines, a sterile scent that clung to the back of her throat. Joan opened her eyes. The recovery room ceiling came into focus, pale tiles cross-hatched with shadows from the monitor glow. For a moment, she didn't move. Every part of her body felt mapped in stitches and dull ache, but her mind was clear. Clear in a way it hadn't been for days. She was alive. Barely, but alive. Her vision drifted toward the clock. 6:42 a.m. The hands moved, slow and certain, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, as if she hadn't been a few breaths away from being misfiled as a lost cause. Footsteps approached. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitaker." The nurse's voice was different, brisk, unfamiliar. No softness, no warmth. Casey wasn't there. "Your surgery went well," the woman continued. "Small bleed, fully evacuated, you're stable now." Joan tried to speak, but her throat caught against the dryness. She managed a faint rasp. "Water." The nurse helped her sip, then adjusted her bed upright. "You'll see your family soon." Family. The word landed like a warning. It wasn't long before the door opened again. A scrape of polished shoes, a faint burst of cologne. Evan. He walked in holding a bouquet of cheap grocery store flowers, smiling like someone posing for a headline. "Hey, Mom." His tone was a performance of relief. "Knew you'd be okay. You always bounce back." Joan studied him. The smile didn't reach his eyes. There was tension behind it, a flicker of something defensive. Guilt, maybe, or the quiet panic of a man realizing his story had fallen apart. Her voice came out gravelly, dry. "You knew?" He blinked. "Of course. You're tough." She said nothing else, just watched him, long enough for the silence to hollow him out. He shifted his weight, laughed softly, and set the flowers down like an apology no one had asked for. "Well," he muttered, glancing toward the door. "The doctor said you'll be home soon. We'll get everything sorted." Sorted? The word hung there, heavy with implication. Joan turned her head away. It was the smallest act of rebellion, but it landed like a slap. Evan's jaw tensed. "Okay. Rest then." He left without meeting her eyes again. The door hadn't even closed before another voice followed. Softer, steadier. "He still doesn't get it, does he?" Marlene stepped into the room carrying a thermos of coffee and a glare sharp enough to cut through steel. Her hair was pulled back, her clothes rumpled. She looked like she hadn't slept, but she was smiling. "They almost buried you alive," she said quietly, settling beside the bed. "If that nurse hadn't pushed, they would have called it anxiety and sent you home to die." Joan swallowed. Her throat burned, but she managed to whisper, "Casey?" Marlene hesitated. Her eyes flickered. "They let her go." The words landed like ice water. "Protocol violations," Marlene said bitterly. "Hospitals covering itself. She was the only one who fought for you, and they canned her before you even woke up." Joan's pulse quickened. She closed her eyes, forcing air into her lungs, in and out, until the trembling in her hand steadied. When she opened them again, the anger was there. Clean, focused, unshakable. "Paper," she croaked. "What?" "I need paper." Marlene blinked, then scrambled for her purse. She handed over a small notepad and a pen. "What are you doing?" Joan's hand moved slowly, the letters jagged at first, then steadying as the adrenaline caught up with her. Line after line poured out. Times, names, details, quotes she remembered from the fog. Psychosomatic presentation. No intervention. Limited treatment. She wrote until the tremor in her wrist blurred the ink. At the top of the page, she wrote one name in all capital letters. Graham Knox. Marlene leaned over. "Who's that?" Attorney, Joan said softly. Patient rights. A small, dangerous smile curved her lips. He handled the malpractice case after they misdiagnosed that teacher in Duluth. He'll know what to do. Marlene nodded slowly. You're serious? Joan met her eyes. They wrote me off, Marlene. Now I'll write them down. Line by line. For a long moment, the room was quiet except for the faint hum of the monitor. Outside, dawn crept over the Minneapolis skyline, the kind of pale, cold light that makes everything look sharper than it should. Marlene stood, gripping Joan's hand. You get your strength back first. Then we'll raise hell. Joan smiled faintly. No, we'll do both. A knock interrupted them. Dr. Porter stepped inside, face pale and drawn. She opened her mouth to speak, to offer some fragile apology. But before she could, a page rang out over the intercom. Code Violet, HR Office, Level 2. Casey's name followed. Marlene and Joan exchanged a look. Violet, Marlene whispered. That's a staff incident code. Joan's pulse monitor began to spike again. She reached for the notebook, tightening her grip until her knuckles went white. Somewhere down the hall, voices rose, frantic, muffled, urgent. Joan closed her eyes, her mind sharpening to a single razor-point thought. They're already covering their tracks. By the second day after surgery, Joan was already plotting. Her body was slow, but her mind was not. She had asked, in her calmest voice, to speak with the hospital administrator. The request was logged, then ignored. When the nurse on duty, another stranger with polite detachment, came to check vitals, Joan asked again. I need to meet with administration, not patient relations. Administration. The woman gave a tight smile. I can pass the message along, Mrs. Whitaker. Joan met her eyes. You won't. The nurse hesitated, clipboard hovering midair. Ma'am? You won't. Joan repeated, softer this time. But you can tell them I'll remember that. The woman swallowed and retreated without a word. By afternoon, Marlene arrived with coffee and fire in her eyes. They're stonewalling you, aren't they? Completely, Joan said, her voice gaining strength. It's like they think if they delay long enough, I'll forget. Marlene sat down, set her thermos on the tray table. Joni, they don't realize who they're dealing with. Joan almost smiled. Almost. They will. Before she could say more, the monitor by her bed chimed with a new notification. It wasn't medical. Her tablet, synced through the hospital's Wi-Fi, blinked with a secure message alert. Unknown sender. Encrypted file attached. Joan's pulse quickened. She tapped it open. Careful. Wary. And there it was. Subject. You deserve the truth. From C. Lynn. Private. Her hands trembled as she read. Mrs. Whitaker, they escorted me out before my shift ended. HR called it protocol violation. Dr. Porter signed the report herself. They said I compromised the chain of command when I pushed for your CT. I need you to know the scan order wasn't luck. It was persistence. The delay nearly cost you everything. The labs were off for 12 hours before anyone acted. I'm writing from a borrowed laptop. They've revoked my hospital credentials, but I copied your chart history and timestamps. It's evidence. The digital trail they can't erase. Encrypted file attached. Password is your son's middle name. Please use it carefully. For what it's worth, you were the first patient I've seen truly silenced by procedure. Don't let them do it again. Casey Lynn Jones stared at the screen until her reflection blurred in the glow. Casey, she whispered. Marlene leaned over her shoulder. What is it? Joan handed her the tablet. Read. As Marlene's eyes scanned the message, her expression shifted from sorrow to fury. They fired her for saving your life? Joan nodded. And they think that's the end of it. Marlene closed the tablet and stood. It's not. She pulled out her phone, opened her email, and typed fast. What are you doing? Joan asked. Forwarding it, Marlene said. To Graham Knox. The name alone steadied the air. Within minutes, the message was sent, along with Casey's attachment, the hospital logs, and a brief note from Marlene. Patient nearly killed by negligence. Evidence enclosed. Call ASAP. They waited. The monitor beeped, counting the seconds between vengeance and validation. It was just past 9 p.m. when Joan's phone vibrated. Unknown number. She answered. Mrs. Whitaker? The voice was low, calm, and precise. This is Graham Knox. Her grip tightened around the phone. You got it. I did. A pause, papers shuffling. You documented everything? Every word, Joan said. Dates, times, witnesses. I have more when I'm discharged. Graham exhaled through the line, the kind of sound lawyers make when they've found leverage. Good. I'll come to you. 3 days later, she was home. Her house felt different now, cleaner, quieter, deliberate. The notebook sat open on the dining table beside the printed lab sheets and Casey's encrypted report, which she'd already decrypted and cataloged. The data was damning. Timestamps showing 12-hour delays, signature mismatches, falsified notes. When the doorbell rang, she knew who it was before she answered. Graham Knox stood on her porch in a dark gray coat, briefcase in hand. His demeanor was measured, but his eyes held the kind of restrained fury only seen in people who fight for a living. Mrs. Whitaker, he nodded once. You've been through hell. I'm not through yet, she said. Inside, he set his briefcase on the table and began to read, line by line, page by page. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer commentary. The room filled with the soft rustle of paper and the tick of her grandfather clock. When he finally looked up, his voice was quiet. They're going to regret this. Joan leaned back in her chair, hands folded, gaze steady. That's the idea. He closed the file slowly, decisively. We'll start with the hospital's internal review, then the board, and then... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. From outside, the wind rattled against the windows, sharp and cold, carrying the faint sound of sirens in the distance. Not for her this time, but it didn't matter. She'd learned how to listen to every sound now, how to decode every silence. The envelope came by courier, thick and official-looking, stamped with the same hospital letterhead Joan had come to despise. It arrived mid-morning, quiet as a threat. She sat at her kitchen table, coffee cooling beside the untouched breakfast, and stared at it. The packet had weight, both literal and moral. Her name was typed neatly across the front, followed by a word that made her skin tighten. Guardianship. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she let the silence build around her. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the wall clock, the sound of her own measured breathing. Finally, she slid her finger under the seal. Inside were forms, statements, a copy of a petition. Her son's handwriting scrawled across the declaration line. Evan Whitaker, guardian of the person. Her pulse slowed to a dangerous calm. He'd done it. He'd actually filed to take control of her medical decisions, citing temporary cognitive instability post-trauma. The words were printed in legal language, detached and sterile. Beneath it, his signature gleamed in blue ink. Joan folded the pages neatly, stood, and walked across the room. The shredder in the corner waited. A relic from her teaching days when she refused to let students toss graded work in the trash. She fed the packet in one sheet at a time, slow and deliberate. The blades hummed like a mechanical verdict. When the last page vanished, she exhaled. Her phone rang almost immediately. Evan. She let it buzz 3 times before answering. Hello, Evan. Mom, he started, his tone clipped, almost performative. Did you get the paperwork? I did. A pause. Then you know I'm just trying to help you. You've been through a lot and... You're not helping me, she interrupted. Her voice was steady, low, the kind of tone that once made a classroom full of teenagers fall silent. "You're trying to own me," he scoffed. "That's ridiculous." "No, Evan," she said. "What's ridiculous is thinking you can control me now that I survived something you nearly let kill me." There was a sharp breath on the other end. Not guilt, just irritation. "This isn't about control, it's about responsibility. You're making rash decisions." Joan smiled faintly. "I've earned the right to make them." Before he could respond, she ended the call. The phone buzzed again almost instantly. Ignored. Then again. Then silence. Outside, snow had begun to fall. Soft, slow flakes dusting the street like an apology the world didn't owe her. She watched it for a moment before turning back to the table, where her notebook and Graham's card waited side by side. She dialed. He answered on the first ring. "I was expecting this," Graham said without preamble. "He filed through the county probate office, right?" "Yes. I'll have it withdrawn before lunch. In the meantime, we're filing a complaint with the hospital's legal department. Their negligence led to all of this. They'll need to answer for every minute of it." Joan closed her eyes, the sound of his voice steadying her. "Good. Also," Graham continued, "you mentioned wanting someone else authorized for your care. I have an associate, Caleb Ross, estate attorney. He can help draft a new medical power of attorney today." By evening, the paperwork was ready. Caleb, young and efficient, arrived with the same quiet respect Graham carried. Joan read every line twice, refusing to miss a single clause. When she reached the line for designated agent, she didn't hesitate. Marlene Ruiz. She signed it with a slow, deliberate hand. Marlene, sitting across from her, blinked. "Me? You're the only person who told the truth when it mattered," Joan said. Marlene's eyes glistened, but she smiled. "Then I guess I'm stuck with you." Caleb gathered the forms. "I'll file this tonight," he said. "By morning, it'll be legally binding. He can't touch your records without your written consent." "Perfect," Joan said. "Because he's not getting it." After they left, the house grew quiet again. She poured herself tea, leaned back in her chair, and opened her laptop. A hospital login portal glowed faintly on the screen. The one she'd bookmarked from Casey's files. Her cursor hovered, then clicked. Patient portal. Account settings. Transfer of care. Joan typed the name of another facility, Fairview Regional, and selected Request Transfer of All Records. Her finger paused over the final button. For a heartbeat, she thought of Casey, of Marlene's trembling hands, of the sterile ceiling lights that had once been the last thing she thought she'd ever see. Then she clicked Submit. The confirmation window blinked. Transfer request accepted. Effective immediately. For the first time in weeks, Joan exhaled without pain. The hearing room smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper. The hospital's favorite perfumes for pretending at purity. Joan sat beside Graham at the long walnut table, spine straight despite the dull ache still lingering behind her temple. Fluorescent lights hummed above, steady and indifferent. At the far end, 7 members of the hospital's internal review board shuffled papers and adjusted microphones. They looked like what they were: administrators dressed as judges, too cautious to feel anything. Dr. Liza Porter sat opposite them, her white coat folded neatly on her lap instead of on her shoulders. The absence of it made her look smaller, almost uncertain. The chairperson, an older woman with rimless glasses and a voice sharp enough to slice through hesitation, called the session to order. "This review concerns the case of Joan Whitaker, incident occurring January 12th through 14th, Mercy General Hospital. Allegations of delayed diagnosis, procedural negligence, and retaliatory termination of staff. Counsel, you may begin." Graham didn't stand dramatically. He simply rose, buttoned his jacket, and spoke in that calm, cutting way of his. "Thank you, Madam Chair. The facts are simple. and, in their simplicity, unforgivable. He pressed a button on the projector remote. The lights dimmed slightly as a digital timeline appeared on the wall. 12:43 p.m. Patient arrival. 1:06 p.m. Triage entry. 3:18 p.m. First physician note. 15 hours later. CT scan ordered. Mrs. Whitaker arrived conscious but unable to communicate. Graham continued. She was described as attention-seeking. No neurological assessment performed, no imaging requested. She was nearly discharged under a psychosomatic label. It was only because of one nurse, Casey Lynn, that a CT was eventually ordered. He clicked again. The screen shifted to a copy of Casey's digital note, time-stamped 3:12 a.m., her words glowing on the projection. Requested emergent neuroconsult. Patient presentation inconsistent with psychosomatic diagnosis. Shortly after that, Graham said quietly, Ms. Lynn was reprimanded, and later, terminated. Dr. Porter's hands tightened in her lap. Her eyes flicked to the board members, searching for a sympathetic face. None looked back. Graham's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Mrs. Whitaker underwent surgery 9 hours later for an active subdural bleed. Every hour before that increased the risk of irreversible damage. You don't need me to explain what that means. He turned slightly. Mrs. Ruiz? Marlene rose from the second row, her presence commanding despite the fluorescent chill. I'm not a lawyer, she said, but I was a nurse for 40 years. I've seen what happens when a woman in pain is labeled emotional, when older patients are called confused instead of critical. You all almost buried a friend of mine because she didn't fit your textbook. She looked directly at Porter. You know it, and I know it. Porter flinched but said nothing. The chairperson nodded. Mrs. Whitaker, would you like to make a statement? Joan stood. The air seemed to hold its breath with her. She leaned on the edge of the table, not weakly, but deliberately. I was awake the whole time, she began. Her voice was even, steady. I heard every word. Every time you dismissed me, every time you believed my son over your own instruments. I remember being called psychosomatic while my brain was bleeding. Her words landed like slow hammer blows. I taught science for 30 years. I taught children to question their assumptions. Maybe it's time you relearn that. She sat. Silence followed. The kind that makes people look down at their notes just to escape it. Dr. Porter finally cleared her throat. I followed protocol. The patient's son indicated she had a history of anxiety. Graham didn't move, but the chill in his eyes silenced her halfway through the sentence. He turned to the board. And that's the defense? That a physician relied on hearsay over evidence? That's not medicine. That's malpractice with paperwork. One of the board members, a man in a navy suit, coughed softly. Dr. Porter, the records show Nurse Lynn requested the CT nearly 12 hours before you did. Why the delay? Porter's jaw flexed. I didn't think it was emergent. The presentation was atypical. Another member, a younger woman near the end of the table, leaned forward. Atypical or inconvenient? That drew a few sidelong glances. Porter's cheeks flushed. Excuse me? The woman folded her hands. You documented psychosomatic presentation within 15 minutes of meeting her, without diagnostic evidence. If Mrs. Whitaker had been a man, 40 years younger, would that label have been used? The silence this time was electric. The chairperson adjusted her glasses. Doctor, please answer the question. Porter's mouth opened, then closed. Her fingers trembled on the edge of the table. I can't speculate. No, Graham said quietly. You already did. A murmur rippled through the board members. The man in the navy suit shook his head. This smells like discrimination, he said, almost to himself. Gender bias, age bias, both. Porter tried to speak again, but the words caught. I never meant. That's the problem, Joan said softly from her seat. You never meant anything at all. The board chair cleared her throat. We'll adjourn for deliberation. Expect formal recommendations within 10 business days. Chairs scraped, papers shuffled. Graham collected his notes. Joan watched Dr. Porter gather her coat. Movements mechanical, dazed. As the room emptied, Graham leaned closer. They won't protect her this time, he said. Joan's gaze followed Porter as she slipped out the side door, shoulders caved inward, her white coat draped over one arm like a shroud. They already didn't, Joan murmured. The hospital thought the hearing was the end of it. They had no idea it was just the audit before the takeover. A week later, Joan sat across from Graham Knox in his downtown office, a minimalist suite lined with legal tomes and quiet intent. Snow dusted the edges of the window panes. The city hummed below, indifferent and alive. Graham clicked through a presentation on his laptop, his tone as methodical as the turning of gears. The hospital's a nonprofit corporation, he explained. That means it has a separate board. Endowment donors, advocacy committees, investment portfolios. They want to appear transparent. Joan watched him over the rim of her tea mug. Transparent to whom? To people who don't read the fine print, he said. But the Patient Advocacy Council? That's the pressure point. The one division that still reports to the board directly. Marlene, seated beside Joan, frowned. And that helps us how? Graham smiled faintly. Because money talks in boardrooms louder than policy, and if you know how to whisper through a trust, you can become the voice behind the curtain. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed forms, financial routing instructions, and a single typed proposal. Whitaker Family Trust Endowment, $250,000 to the Patient Advocacy Council. Joan's pulse ticked upward. Anonymous? Completely. The trust shields your name. You'll be listed under an entity, Whitaker Science Education Fund. No one will tie it back to you unless you want them to. She leaned back, calculating. That's my husband's pension and part of his old IRA. It's supposed to fund scholarships. Graham nodded. Then fund one more. In your own survival's name. This isn't revenge. It's governance. The word landed exactly where it needed to. By the time she signed, the room was still, except for the scratch of her pen. Marlene's grin grew slow and deliberate. Well, Joni, from dismissed to director. She raised her water glass like it was champagne. They'll never see this one coming. Joan smiled back. They rarely do. 3 days later, Joan's phone buzzed with an encrypted confirmation. The wire transfer had cleared. Her trust had been accepted by the hospital's nonprofit entity, her voting proxy assigned quietly to the Patient Advocacy Council. It didn't even make the news, but deep inside the hospital's own system, her name, hidden behind legal layers, was now printed beside a new line item. Primary Endowment Donor, Patient Advocacy Council. The very institution that ignored her pulse now owed her one. Marlene stopped by that night with a bottle of Prosecco and 2 mismatched glasses. Joan didn't usually drink, but she made an exception. They toasted by the fire, the glow turning their faces gold. To Casey, Marlene said. To every nurse who listens, Joan replied. Her phone buzzed again. A new message from an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Whitaker, this is C. Lynn. Heard from an HR contact that my case is being reopened. They said someone on the board requested a review. Was that you? Joan's fingers hovered above the screen. She typed one word back. Always. She set the phone down and looked at Marlene, her expression softening. She's being called back in. Marlene exhaled. Good. Maybe there's still some justice left. Joan didn't answer. Her gaze had shifted to the firelight reflecting off the framed photo of her late husband. The one taken the day he retired, holding a glass of champagne and wearing the same quiet grin she now understood. "You'd like this," she whispered to the picture. Order disguised as chaos. The next morning, Graham called. "There's been movement," he said, his voice threaded with something between disbelief and admiration. "The board wants to meet the donor. The advocacy fund you established caught their attention. You're being invited to their strategic planning summit next quarter." Joan blinked. "Me?" "They think you're a foundation representative," Graham said, almost laughing. "You'll have a seat in the room, and, technically, a vote." The line went quiet for a moment as she absorbed it. Then, quietly, she said, "So after all this time, I get to speak. And they have to listen." "That's right," Graham said. "Every single one of them." That evening, Joan walked out onto her porch. The wind had stilled, the snowbank glinting in the amber streetlight. Somewhere inside her, the tension that had lived in her bones for weeks began to shift. Not gone, but evolving into purpose. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Casey. "They said they're reviewing my termination. HR wants to clarify chain of command. If this works out, I'm going back." Joan typed, "Good. Make them remember why they needed you." She slipped the phone into her pocket and looked out across the neighborhood, exhaling a cloud of breath that rose into the still night like smoke from a controlled burn. The summit was held in the hospital's downtown conference center, a sleek glass building whose mirrored panels caught the morning light like a promise too bright to trust. Joan stepped through the revolving doors, her pace deliberate, her breath even. The marble lobby gleamed with polished self-importance. A young attendant behind the registration table greeted her without looking up. "Name?" Joan adjusted the strap of her leather bag and slid an envelope across the counter. "Whitaker Family Trust." That made the attendant glance up. Her posture straightened instantly. "Oh, of course, Ms. Whitaker. You're listed as a primary endowment donor and a voting board member for today's session." She clipped a badge to a silver lanyard and handed it to her, smiling with rehearsed warmth. "Right this way." Joan pinned the badge to her jacket. "Whitaker Family Trust. Primary endowment donor." The letters gleamed under the light. She caught her reflection in the elevator door. Composed, sharp, unrecognizable from the woman who'd once been motionless under hospital fluorescence. Inside the elevator, the doors closed with a soft sigh. Her pulse thudded once in her throat, not from nerves, but anticipation. When they opened, she stepped into a different kind of theater. The summit room was wide and modern. Glass walls, brushed steel, a skyline view that screamed credibility. Rows of executives, physicians, and administrators buzzed with conversation, coffee cups in hand. At the front, a long table was arranged in a semicircle. Name placards gleamed under soft spotlights. Dr. Liza Porter, Evan Whitaker, Hospital Executive Committee, Board Chair. The sight of those two names together, her sons and her doctors, hit like an unexpected chord. Evan hadn't seen her yet. He stood near the catering table, laughing tightly at something one of the finance directors said. His suit was crisp, his smile polished. He looked every bit the man who thought he'd finally regained control of his narrative. Dr. Porter sat near the front, her posture brittle. The color had drained from her face, though her makeup fought valiantly to disguise it. She looked tired, like someone haunted by their own paperwork. The moderator's voice cut through the murmurs. "If everyone could take their seats, we'll begin shortly. Please welcome our new endowment partner, representing the Whitaker Family Trust." Joan walked down the aisle. The sound of her heels on the polished floor echoed like punctuation marks. She could feel eyes following her. Polite curiosity at first, then dawning recognition. Evan turned at the sound, his smile freezing mid-sentence. "Mom?" It wasn't loud, but it sliced through the hum of conversation. Heads turned. Even the moderator paused. Joan didn't look at him. She simply took her seat near the front, beside a vacant chair marked Donor Representative. Her badge glinted under the light. Dr. Porter's pen clattered against her notepad. She looked up, eyes wide, color draining entirely now. "Mrs. Whitaker," she whispered. Joan gave her a single measured nod. Acknowledgement without forgiveness. The moderator recovered quickly, forcing a smile. "Yes, Ms. Whitaker is joining us as the primary donor for the Patient Advocacy Council Endowment. We're grateful for her generous contribution and the perspective she brings to this board." Applause rippled through the room. Polite, shallow, obligatory. Everyone clapped except two people. Evan's hands stayed still, white-knuckled on his lap. Dr. Porter's hands trembled too much to try. Joan kept her expression neutral, though inside she could feel the weight of poetic symmetry pressing against her chest. The same institution that had silenced her now required her presence to proceed. The moderator continued, outlining the day's agenda: budgets, patient care reform, board elections. But Joan wasn't listening. She was watching the faces around the table, memorizing each reaction: the subtle discomfort, the forced smiles, the awareness that she had rewritten her own file. When the first presentation began, Evan leaned forward slightly, his voice low but sharp. "What are you doing here?" Joan didn't turn. "Listening," she said. "To what?" "To everything you used to talk over." He swallowed hard. "This isn't yours?" She finished for him, softly enough that only he could hear. "No, it never was." Dr. Porter shifted in her seat, pretending to take notes. The moderator clicked to the next slide. "And now, we'll open the floor to our advocacy representative for comments on patient safety reform." All eyes turned toward her. Joan felt the moment slow, compressing into a single heartbeat. She rose, every movement deliberate, her chair sliding back with a controlled scrape. "Thank you," she said calmly, stepping toward the microphone. Her voice carried easily in the acoustics of the glass room. "I'm not here to speak about budgets. I'm here because your system almost erased me, and because it will erase someone else if no one listens." The room fell utterly silent. "I was once told I just wanted attention," she continued, her gaze sweeping the room. "And now I have yours. Let's make good use of it." A few board members exchanged uneasy glances. The moderator nodded stiffly, trying to recover the agenda. "Thank you, Ms. Whitaker. We appreciate your candor." As she sat back down, Evan leaned closer, his whisper taut with anger. "You're embarrassing yourself." Joan turned just enough to meet his eyes. "No, Evan," she said evenly. "I'm educating the room." Her gaze flicked to Dr. Porter, who couldn't hold it for more than a second. 2 weeks after the summit, Joan returned to the same building, this time not as a patient or a mother, but as a board member with agenda privileges. The marble floors didn't intimidate her anymore. They echoed beneath her sensible heels like an overture. The receptionist smiled, a little too widely. "Good morning, Ms. Whitaker. The council chair is expecting you." The office of the Patient Advocacy Council was tucked behind a frosted glass corridor, lined with photographs of smiling families and slogans about compassion. Joan paused at one photo, a nurse holding an elderly woman's hand, and muttered under her breath, "They should have taken that in my room." When she stepped inside, a woman in her 50s rose from behind a walnut desk. Short silver hair, steady eyes, no-nonsense posture. "Ms. Whitaker," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Denise Harper, chair of the Patient Advocacy Council. I've been following your case closely." Joan shook her hand, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Then you know how close I came to becoming a statistic." "I do." Harper gestured toward a seat. "And I know you're not here to relive it, you're here to use it." Joan smiled faintly. "Exactly." They sat. Files spread across the desk. Hospital policy drafts, budget notes, patient survey data. Harper slid one packet forward. We're revising protocols for high-risk patients. You suggested adding mandatory second opinion clauses for cases labeled as psychosomatic or non-emergent. It's bold. Some will call it redundant. Joan tilted her head. Redundant until it saves a life. Harper's mouth twitched, almost a smile. You've got teeth, Ms. Whitaker. I taught teenagers, Joan said. They bite harder. For the first time, Harper laughed. Short, genuine. Then maybe you're exactly who we need. By the end of the meeting, Joan had secured more than a courtesy seat. The board voted to draft her proposal into preliminary review and, by unanimous consent, to reopen the case of Nurse Casey Lynn as part of the reform discussion. When Joan left the room, the winter sun had broken through the skyline, spilling light down the hallway like a spotlight she hadn't asked for, but finally deserved. That Thursday, she stood before an audience of 200 staff members in the hospital auditorium. Her speech had been requested by Harper herself. A survivor's perspective, the invitation had called it. Joan adjusted the microphone, her reflection faint in the teleprompter glass. She didn't use the notes. She didn't need them. I was awake, she began, her voice steady. During my hospitalization, I heard every word spoken about me, every assumption, every dismissal. I wasn't out of my mind. I was inside it, trapped, while others decided how much of me was worth saving. A ripple moved through the audience, administrators, nurses, residents shifting in their seats. I'm not here for sympathy, Joan continued. I'm here because I survived a system designed to move on quickly. I want it to slow down, to listen, especially when patients can't. In the back row, a familiar figure stood, arms folded, face tense. Evan. She didn't acknowledge him. My proposal is simple, she said, projecting her words across the room. If a patient is labeled non-emergent, a second opinion becomes mandatory. 2 sets of eyes, 2 chances to get it right. And if any staff member advocates against resistance, like Nurse Lynn did for me, they deserve protection, not punishment. The room was silent for a long moment. Then, one by one, the nurses began to clap. It spread slowly, then all at once, a low rising tide of applause that drowned out the last trace of doubt. Evan turned and slipped out the side door. She didn't watch him leave. Harper took the stage beside her, eyes bright. Thank you, Ms. Whitaker. On behalf of the council, we'll move your proposal into pilot implementation starting next quarter. Joan nodded once, stepping back from the podium. The applause swelled again, echoing off the high ceilings. The same sound she'd once listened to from a hospital bed as her heart monitor beeped the rhythm of her fight. 2 weeks later, the story broke. The patient who heard everything. That was the headline in Medical Ethics Weekly, followed by a subheader that made Joan's phone light up with messages she hadn't expected. Retired teacher and survivor. Joan Whitaker advocates for systemic change in patient care after being misdiagnosed and silenced. The article quoted her directly. They called it psychosomatic. I call it proof that silence kills faster than illness. Graham texted one word. Brilliant. Marlene sent 3 hearts and a photo of a champagne bottle already open. But it was the last message that made Joan pause. An unknown number with a single line. They printed it on the staff bulletin board. C. Lynn Jones smiled. Not pride, not relief. Something sharper, quieter. Justice, perhaps, in its earliest form. She looked out the window at the snow beginning to fall again, the city's lights flickering in reflection. Her own reflection stared back. The same woman, but no longer powerless. It began with a headline. The patient who heard everything. Joan had written the piece herself. 2,000 measured words of truth sharpened into glass. No embellishment. No self-pity. Just the cold anatomy of what silence costs when authority outweighs instinct. Graham had cautioned her. You realize once this runs, they'll circle the wagons. Joan's reply had been simple. Then they'll have to circle faster. When the op-ed went live, it was 6 a.m. on a Sunday. By noon, it had over 2 million views across healthcare forums, union boards, and medical ethics networks. Nurses shared it in group chats with captions like this, exactly this. By evening, the patient who heard everything trended on medical Twitter. Screenshots appeared in staff lounges across the Midwest, snippets of Joan's words highlighted in yellow. Silence is not neutrality. It is complicity in error. One nurse from St. Paul wrote, "I've been told to calm down for questioning an order. Reading this feels like oxygen." Another from Boston commented, "I printed it for my attending. He didn't look me in the eye for the rest of the shift." The piece spread the way truth does when it's been buried too long. Messy, uncontrollable, alive. By Monday morning, Mercy General's PR department was on fire. A flurry of internal memos circulated. All staff are reminded not to comment publicly regarding Ms. Whitaker's case. The hospital remains committed to transparency and patient safety. Legal review pending. In the cafeteria, someone had taped Joan's article to the vending machine. Someone else had written in red Sharpie beneath the headline, "We hear you now." At noon, Joan sat at her kitchen table, sipping coffee that had long gone cold, watching the chaos unfold through her laptop. Her inbox flooded with messages, journalists, advocacy groups, medical schools asking for permission to reprint excerpts. One message stood out. From Casey Lynn, subject. "I read it twice. It said what none of us are allowed to say. Thank you." Joan's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She didn't reply. Not yet. She just smiled. A quiet, private thing. Marlene called minutes later, voice crackling through the line. "Do you know you're on the evening news?" "I guessed," Joan said. "They called it a whistleblower manifesto." "Manifesto?" Joan laughed softly. "That's generous. I just told the truth." "Truth's dangerous when it's eloquent," Marlene said. "You sound like yourself again." "I finally am myself again." By Tuesday, the hospital's board released a carefully worded statement. All platitudes and polished fear. "We acknowledge recent concerns raised in national media. Mercy General is proud to uphold the highest standards of care and has launched an independent review to ensure patient safety protocols reflect our core values." Joan read it twice and thought, "You're not proud. You're cornered." Graham called that afternoon, his tone more amused than angry. Their legal counsel just reached out. They want a joint statement to align on messaging. "Translation?" Joan asked. "They're terrified." "Good," she said, and hung up. By Wednesday, the backlash became uncontainable. Nurses in multiple states organized open letters referencing Joan's op-ed. Patient advocacy nonprofits flooded Mercy General's social media pages with demands for reform. Even the New England Journal of Medicine linked to her essay in a roundtable about ethical bias. For every paragraph the hospital tried to discredit, 100 more voices echoed it back. The revision they hadn't expected wasn't in policy, it was in the story itself. Joan had rewritten the narrative, line by line, until the institution that silenced her was forced to speak in her language. That night, as the sky turned violet above Minneapolis, Joan's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. "Evan." She hesitated, then answered. "Congratulations," he said flatly. "You've officially made yourself a martyr." Her voice stayed calm. "If telling the truth makes me one, so be it." "You think this fixes anything? You're humiliating me. You're humiliating yourself." "No," she said. "I'm documenting both." "Unbelievable," he muttered. "You've lost perspective." "I lost perspective," she replied, "when I believed you'd protect me instead of my bank account." He went silent. She could hear the ragged edge of his breathing, the panic of a man who'd built his identity on other people's control. Then he said, almost pleading, "Mom, stop before it goes too far." "It already went too far," she said. "You just didn't notice until I survived it." She hung up. The phone buzzed again almost immediately. Another incoming text. She didn't even read it, just tapped block. For the first time, silence felt like victory. Later that night, Joan refreshed the article page one more time. Over 4 million views, dozens of comments still pouring in. Somewhere in the flood of responses was a familiar name, L. Porter. No message, no apology, just a single sentence. "You were right to write it." Joan stared at the words for a long moment, the cursor blinking beside them like a pulse. Then she closed the laptop. The city outside was quiet, the kind of quiet she'd once feared but now claimed as her own. The new office smelled of paint, ambition, and quiet defiance. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, catching on brushed brass letters newly mounted on the wall. The Advocacy Wing, founded by the Whitaker Family Trust. Joan stood in the doorway, watching the reflection of those words shimmer across the polished floor. The lease had been signed less than a month after her op-ed went viral. The building, a modest medical suite on the corner of Nicollet Avenue, once housed an orthopedic practice. Now it was something else entirely. A haven, a reckoning. She'd chosen the name herself, the Advocacy Wing. The double meaning wasn't lost on her, a nod to the hospital wings where people like her were silenced, and a reminder that she had learned to fly past them. Graham entered, balancing 2 paper cups of coffee. "The new signage looks good," he said, handing her one. "It's more than I imagined," she admitted, "but not more than they deserve." He smiled. "You always were efficient with punishment." "Correction," she said. "I'm efficient with purpose." Through the glass wall, a young woman moved between cubicles, carrying a laptop and a box of files. Her black hair was pinned back, her steps brisk. Casey Lynn. It had taken a single phone call and a single line from Joan to bring her back into the fold. "You were right," Joan had told her. "Now let's make it count." Casey now served as lead coordinator, Patient Rights Division. Her desk was already covered in intake forms and color-coded charts. 6 new cases had come in during the first week. Underfunded patients, ignored patients, overruled patients. Graham had taken every one. "This is going to snowball," he said, scanning an open file. "When people realize what we're doing, we'll be flooded." Joan sipped her coffee. "Then we'll hire more advocates." Casey approached, a hesitant smile softening her professional focus. "The phones haven't stopped," she said. "There's a retired postal worker who was refused a cardiac consult, and a young woman from Duluth whose doctor labeled her symptoms stress-related." "Sound familiar?" Joan said dryly. Casey nodded. "Too familiar. But we're helping them now." Graham glanced up. "We're helping them because you two decided the word protocol was negotiable." "Protocol nearly killed me," Joan said. "It deserves negotiation." Casey smiled. Not the timid smile she once gave in hospital corridors, but one born of quiet confidence. "The staff keep asking who our benefactor is," she said. Joan looked toward the plaque resting against the wall, waiting to be mounted. The bronze surface gleamed under the light, dedicated to every patient who was told to be quiet. "Let them wonder," Joan said. "Names matter less than impact." Later that afternoon, Marlene arrived, bundled against the cold, a shopping bag clutched in one hand. She stopped the moment she crossed the threshold. "Good Lord, Joni." Her voice wavered. "You did it." "We did," Joan said. Marlene set the bag down, blinking hard. "I've seen hospitals built, wings opened, boards applauding themselves for compassion. But this?" She trailed off, brushing at her eyes. "This feels like redemption." Joan chuckled softly. That's too poetic. It's just justice, with better furniture. Marlene stepped closer to the wall and touched the cool bronze of the plaque. You really had this made? I really did. Marlene read the inscription aloud, her voice catching midway through. Dedicated to every patient who was told to be quiet. When she turned, her eyes shone with tears. You've given every silenced person a voice, even the ones who never made it out. Joan exhaled slowly, her gaze sweeping the new space. The soft hum of printers, Casey on the phone with a client, Graham flipping through depositions. For the first time, the air around her felt earned. Every story has an author, she said quietly. This one's finally mine. That evening, as the office lights dimmed, Graham returned from the conference room carrying a stack of folders. You might want to see this, he said, sliding the top one across her desk. Joan looked down. The heading stopped her cold. Case num 25 76. Whitaker v. Whitaker. Her eyes narrowed. What is this? Graham rubbed the back of his neck. Filed this morning, County Civil Court. Plaintiff, Evan Whitaker. He's suing you for emotional damages related to your public statements and financial decisions. For a long moment, Joan didn't move. The soft hum of the heating vents filled the room. Then she laughed. Not bitterly, but with a kind of incredulous calm. He's suing me for surviving. He's alleging reputational harm, Graham said carefully. He claims your actions caused professional embarrassment and financial strain. Marlene, still by the door, muttered, He's lucky embarrassment isn't terminal. Joan's hand trembled slightly as she set the folder aside. Then, deliberately, she reached for her pen and signed the cover page. File a counterclaim, she said. Graham blinked. On what grounds? On principle, she replied. And make sure the hearing's public. Casey looked up from her desk. Do you want the press to know? Joan met her gaze. I want the truth to echo. She stood, smoothing her jacket, and crossed to the window. The Minneapolis skyline glowed under the setting sun, glass and steel painted in amber and shadow. For a moment she saw her own reflection superimposed against the city, steady and unshakable. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper, polish, and tension. Morning light slanted through tall windows, casting long, divided shadows across the floor. Joan stood at the end of the corridor outside courtroom 4B, her hands folded calmly in front of her, watching people hurry past in muted tones of gray and navy. She had dressed deliberately, navy blazer, soft gray scarf, nothing extravagant. Respectable, neutral, unshakable. Graham arrived 5 minutes early, as always, files tucked under one arm and an expression that was equal parts composure and quiet satisfaction. They won't see this coming, he said, handing her a copy of their motion. She skimmed the title page, Whitaker v. Whitaker, motion to dismiss, with supporting evidence. Hospital records? She asked. And the audio, Graham replied. Your patient room recordings from the EMT body cam and the nurse's time-stamped notes. They confirm everything. The negligence, the dismissals, all of it. Joan nodded. Then let's end this. Inside, the courtroom hummed with quiet authority. The judge, a woman with iron gray hair and clear blue eyes, presided with a kind of pragmatic empathy that Joan recognized instantly. She'd seen that same look in teachers who had long ago lost patience for theatrics. Evan was already seated at the plaintiff's table, his lawyer whispering in his ear. His suit looked expensive but ill-fitted, his confidence stretched thin. He didn't look at her, not yet. The clerk called the case. Graham rose smoothly. Your Honor, he began, the claim before you, filed by Mr. Evan Whitaker, alleges emotional damages stemming from his mother's public advocacy and financial independence, We move for dismissal on grounds of frivolity, supported by irrefutable evidence of motive and contradiction. He clicked a remote, the screen behind him illuminated with a timeline. January through March. Hospital negligence records. The first audio clip played softly through the courtroom speakers. Evan's voice, unmistakable, filled the room. "She's fine. She just wants attention." The playback echoed off marble. Every spectator stilled. Evan's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Graham didn't pause. "Your Honor, this is the same man who signed a limited treatment order against his mother's express medical interest, then attempted to seize guardianship of her assets while she was hospitalized." Evan's attorney stood, flustered. "That was a misunderstanding." "The documentation says otherwise," Graham interrupted, sliding another file forward. "Probate records, withdrawal attempts from her joint account, and public statements describing her as unstable while she was recovering from surgery." Joan watched without a word. She didn't need to add anything. Her silence had become its own testimony. Graham continued, voice calm but precise. "This lawsuit is not about harm. It's about punishment. From a son who can't stand that his mother's independence outgrew his control." The judge leaned back, tapping a pen against her pad. "Mr. Whitaker," she said finally, looking at Evan, "would you care to respond?" Evan cleared his throat, the sound dry, nervous. "I was trying to protect her reputation. All this publicity. She's made a spectacle of our family." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Your mother almost died due to medical neglect you endorsed. I fail to see how her survival is a spectacle." "She's humiliating me," he said, his voice cracking. "No," the judge said, her tone slicing through the room. "You're humiliating yourself." The silence that followed was absolute. She turned to Graham. "Motion to dismiss. Granted with prejudice. All claims denied. Mr. Whitaker, you should be ashamed." Court adjourned. Her gavel struck once, sharp as justice itself. Outside, reporters gathered near the courthouse steps, but Joan didn't slow down. The spring air was crisp, the wind lifting her hair as she descended the marble stairs. Evan stood off to the side near the curb, alone, his face pale, phone in hand. He looked smaller than she remembered, not in stature, but in certainty. He started to speak. "Mom." She kept walking. No words, no glance. Just the steady rhythm of her heels on concrete, each step the punctuation mark on a story she no longer owed him. Behind her, the courthouse doors swung closed, sealing him inside his own consequence. By the end of the week, the headlines had shifted again. "Judge dismisses Whitaker suit. Advocate's legacy unshaken." Graham's office forwarded her the article, but she didn't even open it. She'd already decided the world didn't need another declaration of her victory. She had work to do. At the advocacy wing, the office buzzed softly with life. Phones ringing, printers humming, the smell of fresh muffins drifting from the break room. Yes, muffins. Joan stood by the counter, oven mitts in hand, pulling out 2 trays of blueberry and lemon poppy seed. Casey hovered near the doorway, grinning. "I didn't take you for a baker." "I wasn't," Joan said, setting the tray down. "I used to make these for my students before finals. Thought we could use the energy." Graham appeared a minute later, loosening his tie. "Court transcripts being archived," he said. "You're officially untouchable." Joan handed him a muffin. "Then let's feed the troops." Marlene joined, laughing softly as she bit into one. "They'll write about your policies and your victories. But this is what'll make them remember you." Joan leaned against the counter, the sound of her team filling the small office. "No," she said quietly. "They'll remember what silence costs, and what it sounds like when it breaks." The laughter grew louder, the air warm with purpose and sugar. Outside, Spring sunlight spilled through the blinds, touching the plaque on the wall, the one that started it all, dedicated to every patient who was told to be quiet. The boardroom overlooked the Minneapolis skyline, morning light glinting off glass towers, the city pulsing awake beneath it. Inside, the table stretched long and polished, its surface reflecting nameplates, coffee cups, and decades of institutional pride. Joan sat near the far end, a new placard gleaming before her. Joan Whitaker, Chair, Patient Advocacy Council. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same hospital that once dismissed her now required her signature to move forward. The board meeting came to order with the low murmur of practiced efficiency. Motions approved, budgets ratified, minutes read. The routine of control. But when the chair recognized the next agenda item, the room shifted. Item 8, the facilitator announced, glancing at his notes. Proposed revision to patient safety and review protocols, submitted by Ms. Whitaker. All eyes turned toward her. Joan rose slowly, smoothing her jacket. Her voice, when it came, carried the clarity of someone who had learned to weaponize calm. This proposal, she said, is not just about policy. It's about perspective. The patient's, not ours. It requires that every diagnosis marked as non-emergent or psychosomatic receive an automatic secondary review, within 6 hours. No exceptions. A few board members shifted in their seats. One cleared his throat. That will require additional staff. Then hire them, Joan said. A faint ripple of laughter broke the tension, but it faded when they saw her expression. Steady, unreadable. She continued. We'll also establish a patient liaison for every case reviewed under this policy. Someone accountable, someone human. Because accountability should not begin only when harm does. The silence that followed wasn't resistant. It was respectful. Joan took a breath and looked around the table. Physicians, executives, administrators, faces she now knew by title and by history. You've read my case file, she said softly. You've read hundreds like it. You know what happens when convenience outweighs conscience. This policy is how we stop pretending we didn't know. At the back of the room, Casey stood among the gallery observers. Not in scrubs this time, but in a navy blazer with an advocacy wing badge. She caught Joan's eye and gave the smallest, proudest nod. Graham was farther back, arms folded, expression neutral, but his eyes bright with that familiar glint of quiet pride. The board chair cleared his throat. Motion to approve the Whitaker policy? Second, came Harper's voice, steady and immediate. All in favor? Hands rose, tentative at first, then unanimously. Every single one. Joan lifted hers last. When the motion carried, the applause was gentle but genuine. A sound not of spectacle, but of acceptance. The chair smiled. Congratulations, Ms. Whitaker. Your policy is now standard practice across the Mercy General System. For a moment the room blurred, not from tears, but from the enormity of it. Her memory flashed, unbidden. Fluorescent lights, a monitor's beep, the voice of her son saying, "She's fine. She just wants attention." Now, every clinician, every board member, every decision-maker in this hospital would have to listen. Not because they wanted to, but because she had written it into law. When the meeting adjourned, Joan stayed behind a moment, collecting her notes. The others filed out in pairs, murmuring congratulations. Dr. Porter passed by, offering a polite nod. Joan returned it. No anger left. Just distance. Casey lingered near the doorway. You did it, she said quietly. Joan smiled. No, we did. Casey's eyes softened. I'll head back to the office. We've already got 3 new clients from St. Cloud. Then we'd better keep earning their trust, Joan said. When the door closed behind her, Joan glanced toward the window. Sunlight flooding the skyline, the same light she'd once watched from a hospital bed through slatted blinds. Graham approached from behind, slipping his hands into his coat pockets. "You realize what just happened?" he asked. Joan nodded. "They voted for change they used to fear." He smiled faintly. "They voted for you." Joan gathered her folder. "They voted for the patient who heard everything." Outside, the air smelled of spring rain and renewal. The hospital loomed across the street. The same Mercy General that had once nearly erased her, now governed partly by her signature. She stood for a moment at the curb, watching doctors cross between buildings, nurses rushing to morning rounds. None of them knew they were walking through the pages of her rewrite. Marlene's car pulled up beside the curb, the window rolling down. "Need a ride, Madam Chair?" Joan smiled. "I walked this far. I can finish it." Marlene laughed, then nodded toward the sky. "You sure you're not tired of hospitals?" Joan looked back at the building, sunlight glinting off the mirrored glass like absolution. "I'm not inside one anymore," she said. "I'm above it." Marlene grinned. "Well, you earned that." Inside the advocacy wing that afternoon, the staff buzzed with quiet celebration. Casey brought in cupcakes this time. Graham clinked his coffee cup against Joan's. "To rewriting the rules," he said. "To hearing everything," Joan replied. She leaned back in her chair, letting the hum of conversation fill the space. Her space. The world outside could spin as it liked. She had built her own gravity here. As sunlight spilled across the plaque on the wall, Joan whispered the final line of her story, not to anyone else but to herself. A promise, a truth, and a victory. "He said I wanted attention. Now every decision has mine."